Ghostbusters. It's a franchise that's been a favourite of mine since childhood. 2 movies and an epic animated run, action figures now worth a small fortune, a handful of 8 and 16-bit video games. It's a franchise that had done a lot before the turn of the century. Now here we are in 2024, 2 more movies down, one less popular than the other, but we'll get to that later, and we're on the cusp of another release. And as I found myself watching the Frozen Empire trailer for the 157th time, I asked myself, how cool would a full-length LEGO game be based on this franchise? Now you may have read my article or seen the video on a similar vein on why Doctor Who would be a perfect fully fledged LEGO outing after its success with LEGO Dimensions, and whilst I had planned for that to be a one-off thing, my recent return to the LEGO multiversal game has reminded me of another great franchise that will work exceptionally well now as a fully fledged game. Now before I go any further, I will caveat everything that is to come that it's a dream scenario, it's never likely to happen. But, much like my Whovian opinion piece, however, what's the harm in asking, what if? So let's take a quick look at the assets that this great franchise has to offer. We have the original movie that started it all. Never meant for bigger things, it was just meant to be a standalone movie of comic greatness that told the story of 4 scientists who essentially set up a supernatural pest control business where they capture and store the nasties of the underworld. Made up of premium Saturday Night Live talent in both cast and writing room, it is considered a defining movie of its era, capturing the zeitgeist of the 1980s New York perfectly. The success of the movie spawned the almost immediate release of an animated show, which began life as a direct sequel to the cinematic release. Taking every inspiration from the movie it could, including its epic theme tune remixed, the real Ghostbusters ran for the majority of a decade, expanding the mythos of the franchise even further. Another animated show followed in the late 90s, the Extreme Ghostbusters, but it never came close to the same level of popularity. 5 years after the original movie released, its cinematic successor finally made its debut. Picking up with a now disbanded team being forced back together to save the world once more, the sequel isn't quite as beloved as its predecessor, despite a full returning cast and some great new additions. Ultimately, the weakness of the movie lies in its villain. There was never the same world-ending threat that the mysteries leading to Zuul gave us. It took nearly 30 years for the franchise to return to the big screen, but before we get to that movie, a quick sideline to 2009's brilliant Ghostbusters the video game. Set a couple of years after Ghostbusters 2, it's the closest thing that fans will ever get to a true Ghostbusters 3, with a wonderful narrative that fits brilliant into the movie universe. For added gravitas, the majority of the original cast returned to voice their characters. 7 years on, and the Ghostbusters franchise was thrown into turmoil, with a production company eager to cash in on the IP and Bill Murray not wanting to return. The decision was made to reboot the franchise, to modernise it, and so was born the Female Ghostbusters. Now for many reasons, some genuine, some shockingly awful, and some just plain ignorant, the movie didn't go down well with the majority of the fan base. Personally, I didn't mind it. It doesn't even come close to the brilliancy of the original movie, but it's far from the worst movie ever released. Whatever your views on it, it did happen, it's part of the history, so let's move on. Of course, the positive spin that you can put on it is that it proved the passion of the originals was still very much alive. The fans wanted more story in that universe, and so with the son of the original director at the helm, Afterlife was born. Taking fan service to near no way home limits, 2021's Ghostbusters Afterlife oozed more nostalgia than a Comic-Con guest lineup. The same soundtrack, the same baddie, the descendants of one of the original characters taking the reins, and topping it all off was the return of the original Ghostbusters. They knew what they were doing. They sold us on a new story dripped in the scent of the original, akin to The Force Awakens. And it worked! From the very first teaser image of the battered old Ecto-1, we were sold. So here we are, 2024, mere weeks away from the release of a 5th movie. LEGO games have done great things with a lot less to work with. Now with 40 years of source material to work with, there are plenty of stories to tell in LEGO form. This doesn't need to be a recreation of the movies in LEGO form. That's been done, successfully I might add, in LEGO Dimensions. Admittedly, those add-ons only gave us a taster in the form of the original classic and the 2016's reboot, but Would it be the right move to make a remake of the movies in a similar vein to Star Wars? Maybe, maybe not. Now, as a lifelong fan of the franchise, it definitely would be exciting to me to see the full franchise remade in glorious LEGO bricks with a segregated storyline for each. It has potential. But let's just take a quick look at LEGO Marvel's Avengers. Avengers is considered the weakest point in the LEGO Marvel franchise, and it's one of the least popular games in the whole LEGO franchise. But why? It's actually a pretty decent game. Could it be its unoriginality, its lack of franchise expansion? There's no certain answer, but what it certainly does serve to remind us is taking a movie franchise and turning it into a LEGO game like for like in the same way they did with Star Wars, it doesn't mean success. Of course, on the flip side, as well as Star Wars, you've got Pirates of the Caribbean, Jurassic World, Lord of the Rings, franchises with less movies and expanded media to draw upon, and yet they did exceptionally well with like-for-like adaptations. So, Ghostbusters could go either way. Let's face it, with what the animated series brought to the table, there is so much in the way of story to tell with this franchise. Moving on to characters, now let's face it, characters maketh a LEGO game. That varying cast of individuals with different abilities are what make the game so appealing, and why the hunt to unlock them for certain collectibles is such an important part of the replayability. Now, had I been writing this back in 2015, I feel that this might have been a much harder sell. The two original movies, combined with the huge expansion from the animated show, offer a huge number of characters, that's for sure, that's definite, but very few of them are protagonists. Now we've got hundreds upon hundreds of ghosts, ghouls and otherworldly creatures that could be bricked up for the game, as well as some great reoccurring side characters, but ultimately our protagonists are Egon, Peter, Ray and Winston. It's not a great deal to work with. Now, the reason that Tolkien's adaptations did so well, even with just the first two of the Hobbit movies, is that it's got a huge cast of good guys with varying models and abilities. Pre-2016, Ghostbusters just didn't have that. Now, that being said, it worked extremely well for LEGO Dimensions, but when you can bring in a cast of characters to accompany the Ghostbusters ranging from Batman to Scooby-Doo, it's a bit hard to use that as a great example of character depth. Luckily for us Ghostbusters fans, it's 2024, and with the inclusion of the female Ghostbusters team, Afterlife's family of Spenglers, as well as Paul Rudd's Gary, and that list grows exponentially. Now, whilst we don't know specifically what Frozen Empire could add to that roster, there are definitely options available in terms of rolling out a varied cast of bricked up characters with the abilities we all know and love from TT LEGO games. Of course, story's one thing, characters are another, but you need great locations, and where Doctor Who has a universe to explore as part of a potential huge open world, Ghostbusters does suffer a bit with its less than diverse locations, shall we say. Almost the entire franchise is set in New York. But so what? Yes, the modern LEGO game fan expects bigger and brasher open worlds, but LEGO Marvel Superheroes focused the huge majority of its open world experience on a fictionalised version of the same city. It expanded out a couple of additional areas, and a Busters game could do the same thanks in no small part to Afterlife. Plus, we don't know what Frozen Empire is going to bring to the table. Imagine, however, what they could do with New York as an open world with the same technology put into the Skywalker saga. LEGO Marvel's offering is a decade old, and the city is fairly compact. There is so much more they could do with it now. There are, of course, other options as well. Other dimensions, for example. The animated show, as well as the 2009 video game, introduced otherworldly dimensions to the franchise. And, even better, thanks to LEGO Dimensions' adaptation of 2016's movie, there's already a blueprint for a dimension switching mechanic. The Dimension Story Pack introduced a new keystone into the game with the female Ghostbusters that allowed them to transition ghostly dimensions to solve puzzles. So there you go, you've got otherworldly dimensions, a mechanic already built into a LEGO game that does it. The options are there. The other thing to consider when you're talking about a LEGO game, a potential LEGO game, is what LEGO are actually doing from a toy perspective. Because, it's good to know there's some love for a franchise there. Now, unlike Doctor Who, LEGO have actually done quite a bit with the Ghostbusters already, with multiple sets released over the last decade, most of which I'm actually lucky enough to own. We've seen a couple of Ecto-1 releases, from the minifigure scale to the glorious collector's build. The reboot movie also saw a LEGO release with a car and characters, but the ultimate set to collect, and my favourite LEGO set of all time, it's the LEGO Ghostbusters Firehouse. It's beautiful, it's stunning. There's clearly a lot of love for the franchise with the toy maker already, that's for sure. Trust me, I love that set, it's awesome. The other thing to consider is, much like Doctor Who as well, we've already had a taste of what could be. The original Ghostbusters level pack in LEGO Dimensions wonderfully bricked up the first movie. It gave us some of the classics, iconic locations, scenes beautifully rendered in LEGO form. It even included the original audio from the movie. Now, that's not something I would recommend for a larger scale game, just purely because of the ages of these things, but it worked really well in this compact environment. So there you go, we've got potentially awesome locations, a much larger cast of characters, there are stories galore to tell, and plenty to work with from the source material. Now, Ghostbusters as a franchise has seen a significant rejuvenation over the last few years. A new generation is being lined up to continue the story, and a new generation of fans are emerging. This has huge potential for success in brick form. Now, sadly, getting serious on this pipe dream, however, licensing will always be a consideration, adding to that the uncertainty of TT Games' future developments. This is unlikely to ever happen, as I said right at the beginning, but, you know, we can dream. We can dream. We can, however, take solace in the fact that LEGO Dimensions gave us a taste of something nobody ever saw coming, and it was truly beautiful and brilliant. I want more. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you fellow Ghostbusters fans out there agree with me. Let me know in the comments, what would you like to see from a LEGO Ghostbusters game? This is just a kind of fantasy conversation, so, you know, it's never going to go anywhere, but, if you could have whatever, what would it be in Ghostbusters form? Anyway, please subscribe, like, share, all the usual, and I'm back very soon with another video. Thanks for watching, bye bye.